So instead of a multi-generational ministry moment, I want to share a short reflection. And my colleagues asked me, what about the grief? I replied, that will come later, when I get to the other side, when I don't have so many logistics on my mind. And then came a conversation with my sister. After hearing about my Friday afternoon of juggling phone calls and a barrage of texts, she suggested I find someone else to preach. I set my alarm for 9 a.m. on Saturday morning, so not to wake up anybody too early. I wake up a lot earlier these days because my sleep has been quite disturbed. That alarm was just the reminder of being polite. I texted one friend, and Sarah was the second person I texted, and the first to say yes. I was in all these when the tears came. Tears of weariness and relief and grief. The tears continued on intermittently as I went to the Asian market and to Target. So I'm here today wearing my vulnerability on my sleeve, practicing what I preach. That stinks. I pride myself in being strong, but I have to be honest about the fact that I am tired and tender and scared and overwhelmed and heartbroken, and that is getting in the way of my ministry. You see, a few weeks ago, Linda and I were called into the office where my mom lives and told she has to move. We went and looked at a couple places, and ultimately she has decided super reluctantly to move into memory care where she is. And she's responded to this news with all sorts of emotions and actions. Her mind, under stress, is getting more distorted. Friday night, I got 20 texts from her, some so nonsensical that they've made me dizzy. She's contacted an attorney, wept, schemed up so many other options for the week to come, including buying an Airbnb, moving to Long Island, or simply moving to an apartment on her own. That's the thing. Her kind of dementia masks the disease from herself. She doesn't recall being lost in the building or coming downstairs with envelopes of cash and giving it to the receptionist, or when the iPad she won through an offer online can get paid for, and the postage can get paid for when they deliver it. She doesn't recall leaving from the wrong door of the building and telling me she sees snow and garbage cans. She doesn't recall telling her friend that I have a boyfriend and I went to Colorado with him to look at his second house. Let me tell you, this is uncomfortable stuff to share. And it is real. It is so real. Many of you know my mom from the past 7 years of her attending services and events. I imagine you feel some of the same heartbreak. And this, my beloveds, is vulnerable stuff. Mom's dementia, the illness that is slowly taking so much of what I know her from her away from me. It's real. And the sadness and the grief and the disorientation that I'm feeling is something that I know many of you have felt at different stages in your life with different things going on. So together we recognize the fragility of our life and our own vulnerability as we navigate challenges that always seem to come. May you feel free to share your vulnerabilities with each other and with me. We need to take care of one another, and we need to find ways to take care of ourselves when we're on our knees and we feel weak and heartbroken. And with gratitude, I'm so grateful she said yes. So if you're wondering why the slide said I was preaching, that's why. A reading by Cheryl Dumensnil. I began studying poetry with Kim Adonisio in 1992. Beyond craft, early in my career, Kim taught me how to muscle up in the face of adversity and rejection. Never let the bastards get you down, she wrote on that postcard she sent to me in graduate school, and I took it to heart. With her support, I learned to turn adversity into opportunity, to recall my vision, to strengthen my resolve, and to move forward. By example, Kim has taught me that as fierce and edgy as a poet's writing may be, it comes from a bruised, tender place. You can't have one without the other. If you're all edge, you're pure defensiveness. If you're all bruised tenderness, you'll never get out of bed. Living a poet's life means developing the ability to be both vulnerable enough to feel the impact of the world and strong enough to speak the truth about it. And the second reading is by Paul E. Nelson, number 698, evidence-based poem for Daniel Smith, Hillsborough, Missouri, December 16th, 2017. Daniel, forget if you can the seizure of air, space, heart. A quote by Daphne Marlatt. This is a vulnerable poem, as all poems, all sentiment beings. A poem called out entitlement, celebrating diversity, a transgender poem you could read to a fetus. An evidence-based poem, while at the same time a science-based poem, honoring all the moorings one anchors to at the calm, at the center of delusion.
As Laura told you, I am Reverend Sarah. I use she, her pronouns. I'm here. Thank you for having me. Always take a moment to center before I start. So, we have been taught to fear a lot of things in this life, that there isn't enough to go around, not enough food or housing, not enough money, especially not enough love. That if we aren't perfect, we're not worthy of connection and love. We have been taught to fear that people will take advantage of us if they know we have weaknesses. And so we shore up the vulnerability in our hearts by building walls and keeping secrets. These things we hide about ourselves are often the most vulnerable parts. The things we don't want others to see, obviously. So we create a facade, a mask that we put on to cover our flaws, a wall we put up to keep out the pain. We all have our different ways of keeping people out. Maybe you act like you're always happy and loving and generous and cheerful, or better than everyone. Or maybe you don't reach out, pretending that everything is okay when really you're hurting. And sure, these are helpful tools for situations, lots of situations, but the problem is we can't hide who we are and connect in real ways. If you only ever show people your mask, you will never trust that people really love you. So here's the rub. Shutting out hurt also shuts out happiness. Avoiding pain means avoiding joy. We can't pick and choose. The only way to experience real love is to be open to experiencing real hurt. The only way to change is to face our fears. Vulnerability is coming out from behind your mask and feeling the power of authenticity. In his book, The Barefoot Doctor's Guide to the Tao, a spiritual handbook for the urban warrior, which is a ridiculous title, author Stephen Russell writes, vulnerability is the only authentic state. Being vulnerable means being open for wounding, yes, but also for pleasure. Being open to the wounds of life means also being open to bounty and beauty. Don't mask or deny your vulnerability. It is your greatest asset. Be vulnerable. Quake and shake in your boots with it, he says. The new goodness is coming to you in the form of people and situations that can only come if you are vulnerable. We've been taught so many times that vulnerability is showing weakness, but really, vulnerability is showing strength. It's power. Power is more than building walls or wielding weapons. Power can be allowing someone else to understand who you are. Power is hearing who another person is and connecting to them. Power is seeing the suffering of others and choosing to recognize that it could happen to you at any time, moving forward anyway. Power is saying, I've been hurt and I will be hurt again, and I choose to remain open to what life brings me. It takes strength to live that way. It takes courage. It takes a lot that can happen in this hard, crazy world, and there is so much suffering, so many disasters waiting to unfold around the corner. If we let our fear run the show, we're likely to stick our head in the ground anytime we get a whiff of anything that might upset us. This may be why so many people don't do anything about the environment or homelessness or social justice or racial discrimination. It's too big, too hard, too scary to look at the suffering and imagine that it could happen to me. I don't want to face the people who remind me of the fact that I could lose everything, be just destitute, living on the street, just one missed paycheck, too. I don't want to face the fact that we as a community, as a country, have effectively abandoned the poor, the sick, the disabled. We as a culture have become so fixated on scarcity that even owning a home and having thousands of dollars in our savings account isn't enough for us to feel safe. How can we give money to anyone else if we don't feel like we have enough? How can we give of ourselves if we don't feel like we are enough? According to Brene Brown in her book, Daring Greatly, worrying about scarcity is our culture's version of post-traumatic stress. It happens when we've been through too much, and rather than coming together to heal, which requires vulnerability, we're angry and scared and at each other's throats. We've abandoned vulnerability and each other to save and protect ourselves. The truth of the matter is, we can't save ourselves. We have to do it together. We're all in this together, so we have to stick together to make anything better. We have to start with our own vulnerability. Got to be willing to see how vulnerable we are and have to be able to live from a place of that vulnerability. When we put up walls between ourselves and the people who need help, we can't connect with them in a real way. We can't empathize with them. We can't make real change. Antoinette Tuff, the school administrator in Georgia, who talked a gunman out of shooting anyone at her school back in 2013, is an example of strength. She stood strong, not letting that gunman any further into the school than her desk, and she showed courage when she shared her vulnerability with the man pointing a gun at her. Antoinette showed the gunman that she was hurting too, that she understood that life sucks, but the only way to make it is together. As the poet Chris Jammy says, to share your weakness is to make yourself vulnerable. To make yourself vulnerable is to show your strength. She saved lives by showing her vulnerability, and in her vulnerability, she showed her strength. We all have vulnerabilities. We all have inner strength, and we can all make a difference in the world. But if we really want to make a change, we got to face our part in the problem. Facing our own faults is a huge, scary act of vulnerability. Looking at the ways you have inadvertently played a part in a society that is broken can shake you down to the foundation. But facing that vulnerability makes it possible to see a path forward. Not that long ago, I was shaken by my experience taking a class on exploring white privilege. I sat in a room with many other people and realized that I make certain assumptions about the way the world works that don't ring true to most BIPOC folks. I feel like the world is generally a safe place. I know that I can find people who look like me most places I go. I take these things for granted. Moving to Madison, Wisconsin, which is where I moved here from, was an interesting experience. Having lived in racially diverse neighborhoods in both San Diego and Manhattan, I was used to seeing many people of color in my life every day. I had heard from a lot of people how wonderful Madison was, such a sweet, wonderful, hippie place. And I was delighted to find out that they were right, that the city feels comfortable. When I realized after being there for a while, for a couple of years, and to my own chagrin, was that the reason I found it comfortable was that the city, the parts I was in, was largely white. It was very, very segregated city. Most of the neighborhoods I went to been upper middle class. And I was completely shocked that I was feeling this way. I felt like I bought into the propaganda that white people are good and safe and people of color are dangerous. I felt like I had betrayed my own belief that I was a good person working towards the goal of ending racism. I had to open myself to the discomfort to admit to myself that I was and am racist. I hate it. It's vulnerable to say it aloud to you. And I'm working to dismantle it in myself and in the world. But we have to start first from our own vulnerability and tenderness and be willing to stretch our own comfort zone in order to change. So here I am, standing in front of you, sharing my vulnerability, pushing the limits of my discomfort. I hope you all will choose to do the same. I am still a work in progress. I still have to be open and vulnerable to finding out new things about myself. And I'm still looking for small ways to be rebellious and create change, even if it's only in myself. Tomorrow, I might find a way to create change in a more rebellious way. Tomorrow, we might use our vulnerability to change the world. We all together. As Brene Brown says so well, owning our story can be hard, but not nearly as difficult as spending our lives running from it. Embracing our vulnerability is risky, but not nearly as dangerous as giving up on love and belonging and joy. The experiences that make us the most vulnerable. Only when we are brave enough to explore the darkness will we discover the infinite power of our light. Amen.